Alright, hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom. As always, first and foremost, before we get started, giving all praise, honor, and glory unto excuse me, unto our power, Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha HaKodash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, the elders, great millstone that have taught us his truth and that rule well. And peace and blessings go out to the hopeful members of the elect, scattered throughout the four winds of the earth, that are in the hopes of receiving salvation and mercy during the time of Jacob's trouble, and that are worshiping the Heavenly Father in sincerity, in spirit, and in truth. Alright? Now in this lesson I want to talk about a couple of the outcomes of what this whole Venezuela conflict is going to bring forth to the table, and of course measure it through the prophecies that we find within the scriptures to further illustrate the bigger picture of how it will affect not only America, which is Babylon the Great in the scriptures, but how it's also going to heighten geopolitical issues where you have these little controversies with China, as for the brothers that have done their history and their in homework, so to speak. China has a lot of relations with Venezuela based upon them having a lot of oil reserves, and on top of that, something that a lot of people don't know is that Venezuela has a lot of lithium. They're a part of this one thing called the Triangle of Lithium. It's called, of course, the Lithium Triangle refers to the rich lithium deposits in Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, holding over half the world's identified reserves. But Venezuela is not part of this core region, though it has its own lithium potential and interest, often discussed in the context of China's growing influence and South America's strategic mineral race, adding to geopolitical competition with the U.S. for these vital resources. All right, and as you've been tuning in within these little conferences that the press hosts with Trump, all right, he's been making the point about knocking on the door of Chile, so to speak. And if I'm not mistaken, the president of Chile actually made a point about how yesterday was Venezuela, tomorrow it could be us. All right, so we're living in a time where a lot of the a lot of these countries are in a spirit where they don't know what's going to happen. But for us brothers and sisters that understand prophecy, we realize that Esau is just doing the same thing that he's always been doing. His whole track record illustrates him being nothing more but the thief. And what does the thief do? He does nothing more but comes to steal, kill, and destroy, pursuant to John 10 and 10, man. Alright? And within this whole, example, by way of Venezuela, it shows that idea, Now, another point that I want to highlight as I, further, get into this lesson is also illustrate the idea of how, these Venezuelans, which are the Asherites, all right, the nation of Israel, they're now falling within the snare of democracy, man. As you've been seeing a lot of these different people that live in Venezuela, or the people that used to live in Venezuela and now live in places like America, a lot of them are in a spirit where they're in a spirit of mirth, so to speak, because of America taking control of Venezuela's government. All right. If you go into some of that information, Maduro didn't have health care for everybody. If you were some kind of cancer patient, you were pretty much noted as being dead. And there's a lot more other things like the poverty and whatnot. But within the set message that America is giving off to the citizens of Venezuela, they think that change is going to come in a positive manner. They think that Venezuela is going to become, what do you call it? Damn, the word's escaping me right now, man. But they're going to be more, in essence, they're going to be colonized, just to put it to you like that. And, to the Venezuelans, they think that's a good thing. All right. But when you go into the history of colonization, it never came down with something beneficial to the natives of the region that Esau would go to, So I wanted to get this real quick in Habakkuk 2 and 15. It says, "Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, all right, that puttest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also." And this has been the sad motive of operation of what democracy is, man. You know, real quick, I wanted to get this off a chat before we keep reading on in that precept in Habakkuk. I simply asked chat something about how has democracy negatively affected countries that America has conquered. All right. And as always, when you ask certain questions with chat, it always gives you that bias response about not taking either side. But as you read between the lines and you spit out the bones, chat be going in. But when we hit the third bullet point, it says democracy used as a cover for foreign control. All right. It says in several countries, democracy functioned as a branding tool, while real power remained influenced by U.S. military presence, IMF/World Bank conditions, foreign corporate interest, embassy-backed elites. The result? Citizens associate democracy with humiliation and dependency. And that's the reality of what these Venezuelans are going to wake up to when they see that Esau is coming in there not for their benefit, but for their own gain's sake, man. Again, within what we read at the beginning of this video concerning that lithium triangle, all right, Esau's coming in there just for that, along with the other countries that he's targeting, like Chile, Bolivia, and I think the other one was Argentina, And it's funny because, again, China's MO was to do that, And as America's making moves to where he's, getting there first, so to speak, China's going to get pissed the hell off. And that's going to do nothing more but heighten, like I said earlier, geopolitical issues. All right? And furthermore, it's going to fulfill the prophecy of these nations preparing themselves against Babylon. All right? The great whore that sitteth upon many waters. All right? Let's read these two examples that it gives us. It says, Iraq and Afghanistan. Governments were widely viewed as U.S.-backed, not nationally sovereign. Haiti. Repeated interventions undermined faith in elections. All right? And although these, Venezuelans think that one person that they put as, the substitute as Maduro, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's a woman. Let me look it up real quick. Let's look up who it is. But if I'm not mistaken, it's a little hat. All right. Yep, there she is. I'm not sure if that's her name, Delcy. But if I stand to be correct, yep, Delcy Rodriguez. Let's actually look it up like this, because this little what do you call it, article doesn't really give too much info concerning that. But yeah, she has a little hat background, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, she was born 1969, a Venezuelan lawyer, a diplomat, blah blah. Let's just do that, fuck it. Right. Yeah, I can't find it, man, but brothers can find it out there. But this, if she's not a little hat, she's for the little hats and nothing more but another puppet that Esau set up for the purpose of him taking what he wants and keeping society of the Venezuelans desensitized from the reality of what's really gonna go down, man. But again, this is the set strategy of what democracy has always done. And the outcome always plays out to the point to where Esau gets what he wants and the people end up in a far worse condition than where they are, But this is the white man that all of you Jakes love to glorify, mainly talking to the northern tribes, because Northern Kingdom be, worshiping the white man, vouching for him, talking about he's not so bad, this, that, and the third. But very soon, I mean, shit, we're living in a time where his true colors are being shown for what they really are, but it's gonna be to the point to where we really don't have to say anything. Esau's at that point where he's just gonna start pursuing to Revelation 12 and 12, moving with great wrath because he knows that he has but a short time. All right. And a lot of people are starting to recognize that. Although you do have your fair share of people that are vouching for Trump in terms of what he just did, you also have on the other side a lot of Edomites that are seeing the reality of what he's doing. They're calling it unjust, not according to the to the Constitution, things of that nature, man. But reading this again in Habakkuk 2 and 15, it says, "Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink," alright, which can play under the figure of democracy, "that puttest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunk also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness." And the nakedness, alright, plays out within the figure of being in sin, alright? And the sin that the Venezuelans can be found in is trusting in man rather than the Heavenly Father. The word nakedness goes back to the Strong's H4589. The word there's ma'ai war, and it says nakedness pudendum. When you look up this word, it says a person's external genitals, especially a woman's. But the point being is you're now found within a vessel that's unclean to the Heavenly Father. And it was all done and said because of you falling under the temptation of believing that the American government would help you. Alright? And that's been pretty much the gist of how people, in particular the other nations, they've been victims of that. Real quick, I had this pulled up in Genesis 3 and 6, concerning when the woman, alright, Eve, was supplanted by the serpent, or deceived, better said. Genesis 3 and 6, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes," alright, "and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof." And what's that fruit? Again, the ways of the devil, so to speak. Alright? A way that leads you into a path that, makes you at variance with the Heavenly Father. Alright? Now, I forget what word I looked up. Genesis 3 and 6. Strong's H8378. I think it might be the word desire. Okay, pleasant. Alright, when you look up the Hebrew word for pleasant, it goes back to the word thawa. Alright? And it says, under the biblical usage, the desire, wish, longings of one's heart. And as I was putting this lesson together, man, and just, looking at the perspective of the Asherites out there in Venezuela, they're in the spirit of what Asaph was talking about in Psalms, the 73rd chapter. They envy the wicked. They love how things are being ran, but they're not understanding or weighing the, weighing in the balance what's going to happen in the latter end, man. They don't recognize the fact that Esau, he's the devil, a deceiver, along with being Satan, an adversary. All right. And now they're falling under that same position as these other nations, man. Of being used, and then later on being thrown away as a towel, as it tells us in Sirach the 13th chapter. Thrice he wrings you out and then throws your ass out there, because you now serve him no use, so to speak. Alright? So that was the point that I wanted to make concerning, democracy. Now, I want to go here under this little dialogue that I made with chat concerning what responses are Venezuela's constituents like China, Russia, and Iran responding after the event that took place on the 3rd of January. Alright? And again, within this whole event that just took place, this puts America in a very sticky situation within the world of governing powers. All right. So let's read a little bit of this, and then of course we'll marry it with the scriptures. All right. The first country that chat brings up is China. It says China's response: strong condemnation of the U.S. action. China has publicly criticized the U.S. military operation that resulted in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro as a violation of international law and a breach of Venezuela's sovereignty. And that's facts. Here it is, another country grabs a president from another country and has him in custody. That in itself shows you that Esau does whatever the hell he wants. Pursuant to Job 9:24, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked, and he does whatever the hell he wants. All right. It says China stated that no country should act as the world's judge. All right. It says Chinese officials emphasize respect for national sovereignty and oppose unilateral force used to change a government. This reflects Beijing's strategic interests in Venezuela, especially economic and energy ties, which is what we read about concerning the oil, concerning the lithium triangle, and many other resources that China wants for the purpose of getting a upper leg, so to speak, within this race to 6G. When you go into those different biometrics and technology that Esau and the heathen are trying to bring into the New World Order, it all plays within the figure of technology that requires things like that. This is why silver is so expensive, man. In order to make robots, what do you think you need? You need silver. You need lithium. All right? So China right now is butthurt. All right? Along with China's friends like Russia, Iran, and the other, members of BRICS. Okay? Now let's read Russia's response. It says condemnation and warnings. Russian politicians and officials describe the U.S. military action as unlawful and destabilizing, asserting that it undermines international norms and sovereignty. Russia reaffirmed solidarity with Venezuela and criticized the U.S. justification for the strikes as unfounded. They have called for diplomatic solutions and urged restraint to avoid further escalation. All right? So in other words, Russia, wants to get carnal, so to speak. All right? If I'm not mistaken, there was an article that a brother posted in one of our chats where Russia had sent some kind of delegate down to Venezuela. So Russia ain't playing with that, man. All right? Now let's read Iran's response. All right? Matter of fact, before we keep reading, let me get a quick precept, man. In Jeremiah 51, and the point that I want should be around 21, where it speaks about preparing. Let's just look up that word. Yep, Jeremiah 51, and 27. It says, set you up a standard in the land, blow the trumpet among the nations. And what is this trumpet all about? It's about war. All right, a battle cry, as it tells us in the NLT. It says, prepare the nations against her. Who is the her? Babylon, which is America. Call together against her the kingdoms of Adarat, Menai, Ashkenaz, and appoint a captain against her. Cause the horses to come up as rough caterpillars. Prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes. And who are the modern day Medes in this generation? The Russians. All right. The captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. All right. And again, within the said borderline of the people that work with Russia, all right, they all are enemies of America. Again, China, Iran, South Africa, along with the other countries that are found within that Medo-Persian geography, like Yemen, UAE, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, etc. and etc. Okay? We're living in a time, man, where there's a lot of um, a lot of tension, you know, and it's beautiful. At least for us, brothers. A lot of Edomites right now are in a very trembling spirit where they're scared as hell what's going to happen, you know? But let's keep reading on here in chat just to kind of, marry together what this conversation with ChatGPT is illustrating, man. And it's nothing more but the set reality of what these nations are now about to fulfill on America, and that's destruction. So let's read Iran's response. It says, Iran condemned the U.S. strikes as a flagrant violation of Venezuela's sovereignty and territorial integrity, highlighting that Venezuela has the right to defend itself. The statement from Tehran aligned with broader criticism from other governments that see the U.S. move as overreach and a dangerous precedent. Alright? So again, across the borderlines of every, other nation, they see this as being wicked as hell. But what does Esau always do? As Elder Muwatazak, the head elder out here in California says, Esau, alright, when it comes down to the propaganda that he paints over here to the American citizens, Esau paints the picture as if, somebody's, as somebody's pouring syrup on shit and calling it pancakes, that this is going to be nothing more but for the purpose of stopping not only drugs from coming across the ocean, which is bullshit, alright, but to also get further control within helping the Venezuelan community and stealing their oil. But we're not going to talk about that. This is the mind frame of Esau, man. Alright, the so-called American, the so-called white people. Now let's read the summary of what Chat gives us concerning what this is going to lead to. Number 1, heightened global tensions. The U.S. action has already sparked widespread international condemnation from China, Russia, Iran, and other nations, raising tensions between these states and Washington. If diplomatic channels fail to ease disputes, this could contribute to a broader U.S. China/Russia rivalry playing out more sharply in Latin America. Alright? And that's, again, concerning what we read regarding lithium, that could very well happen. Yeah, they could go to other countries like Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, hell, even Mexico. Again, the cost of silver in the US is skyrocketing right now because of China not importing their silver to us anymore, or to America. Alright? But who's the next matter of fact, let me look it up real quick just so you can see it for yourself. But who else do you think has silver? Mexico. Alright, does Mexico have lots of silver? We'll just look it up like that. Yup, it says yes, Mexico has a vast amount of silver and has been the world's leading silver producer for over a decade, thanks to significant reserves and extensive mining operations, particularly in Zacatecas region, making it a global powerhouse for silver supply. Okay? So, Esau knows that without a doubt, man. Alright? I wouldn't be surprised if you see another attack in Mexico. Under the guidelines of what? The cartel. The same thing that they did with Venezuela, man. So, again, we're dealing with the devil. Alright? And within how these things start playing out in terms of, hurting the pockets of China, Russia, and the different, world leaders right now that have the same capability as America, we'll see how things escalate, man. And if I'm not mistaken, Mexico is a part of BRICS. When you look at BRICS, the dollar that they've created, there's on the back it shows you a circle with a bunch of flags, and one of those flags happens to be Mexico. Okay. So if America decides to come down on Mexico and do all of this crazy shit, That's not gonna make China, Russia, and all those other countries too happy. But we'll see what happens, man. But again, we're living in a time where the nations have drunken the wine of America, and now they're seeing the reality of what it's produced, and it's nothing good. Now they're in a spirit where they want vengeance, man. And as a matter of fact, we'll get that real quick. In Jeremiah 51:7, it says, Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. Alright? The same precept that we can apply within Habakkuk 2:15 of this drink being democracy. Democracy has done nothing more but given Esau what he wants and fucked over those that agreed with it. Real quick, there's a little more in this chat that I had with concerning the topic of democracy and what it does to nations. It says number 4, economic shock and inequality after regime change. U.S.-backed democratic transitions often came with rapid privatization, I wonder why that is, market liberalization, removal of subsidies, opening markets for foreign corporations. So again, all of this paints the picture of doing what? Of helping America. Now let's read the negative effects. Alright? Shit, I thought this was negative, but let's see what else chat's got to offer. It says collapse of local industries, mass unemployment. And again, this is big concerning Venezuela, man. A lot of these dumbass Venezuelans think that there's going to be, work for them. America's going to bring jobs, this and a third. But hell no, they're not. They're going to do nothing more but start using robots. Alright? And you can look that up for yourself, man. America ain't going to give those little niggas work. Okay. Reading on, it says wealth concentrated in elites tied to foreign interests. And what's this foreign interest? Getting more oil so that America could prolong the said effect of the dollar not crashing. It says democracy blamed for poverty. And there you go, man. Okay. And it gives us 2 examples. Iraq, state industries dismantled, foreign firms dominated reconstruction. Latin America, democratic governments constrained by debt and IMF policies. So again, man, the same thing's gonna happen to Venezuela. Yeah, you people, and I really doubt that, America gives you people free health insurance. But if he does, either way, you're gonna fall within the same trick bag of being a victim of what Esau has done to the whole world, and that's rape, rob, and murder your ass. Okay? Number 5, destruction of existing social order without replacement. It says, even authoritarian systems often maintain security, infrastructure, predictable governance. When those systems were destroyed abruptly, democracy was expected to replace them instantly. The outcome, chaos instead of freedom. Nostalgia for authoritarian rule. And that's exactly what's going to happen, man. Again, a lot of people hated Nicolas Maduro, but he was, he wasn't that bad of a guy. He hated the little hats, man. I won't doubt it. Give this a year or 2, Lord willing, we're out. We're delivered out of this hellhole, but give it some time. And you're going to see that a lot of those Venezuelans are going to be crying for Nicolas to be back in that seat of presidency. It always happens, man. Let's get these last 2 points. It says weaponization of democracy rhetoric. Democracy has often been invoked selectively, promoted where regimes oppose U.S. interests. And is that not what's happening within this whole Venezuela thing? It says ignored where authoritarian allies serve U.S. strategy. The result, democracy seen as hypocritical, local populations distrust democratic messaging, credibility destroyed. And as the scriptures tell us, man, never trust thine enemy. Alright? And that's pretty much the point, But again, America has put all these nations within that hypnotism, all right, of thinking that democracy is good, but now they're waking up from that illusion, and they see how fucked up Esau left them. And now they want vengeance. So reading this again in Jeremiah 51:7, Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. Okay? The nations have drunken over wine, therefore the nations are mad. Alright? To the point to where they're still suffering little plights within what America is doing right now. China, Russia, they're all mad as hell. Because one of their homeboys decided to fall, and when I was looking at this whole thing, I thought China was gonna do something, help out Venezuela, but they ended up just letting Venezuela fall victim to Babylon. But again, this does nothing more but heighten the tension within the issues that these heathen are fighting after. Alright, so yeah, man, with that was pretty much all I had for this lesson, just to further, edify within the aspect of how the heathen are preparing themselves against America. Venezuela, alright, is another victim of what democracy produces, alright, and Esau is being seen for who he really is, man, and that's a thief. Pursuant to Revelation, the 6th chapter, death and hell follows wherever this dude goes, So with that, man, as always, I want to end off by giving all praise to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Racha HaKodash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, the elders of Great Millstone that have taught us His truth, and peace and blessings go out to the elect. Shalom.